The power of denial is a strong one. I get that. But I do not understand how you can have a stalker who has shown she is willing and able to tamper with your vehicles, and you see a puddle underneath your car, a suspicious puddle, and you are not like, hello. Today I wanted to focus on some more real life horrors. So we're going to do some true crime again. I'm not just focusing on one particular story. I have 3 books that I want to talk about, but they all focus on the same crime, which is stalking, specifically women stalking women. The most common perpetrator of stalking is men. It's usually a case of the abusive ex-husband or some type of ex-relationship. They're upset that the relationship ended and they're wanting to regain that control. Or it's a situation where they want a relationship. They're under the impression that if they just try hard enough, that they'll get what they want. However, women are also stalkers. When women do stalk, it's usually a similar situation where it's an ex-partner or it's someone that they are romantically interested in. But then there is the case of women stalking women, which tends to be a little bit different because usually it's not a romantic interest. I don't want to be with you. I want to be you. I want something that you have. And some part of me thinks that if I just analyze every little detail about you, that I'll be able to garner what it is about you that helps you achieve the things you achieve or look the way you look or whatever it is that has incited this person's jealousy. All 3 of these books were written by the victims themselves. I do think if someone is willing and able to take the time to compile all this information together in order to write a comprehensive, interesting book, they deserve to be compensated, even if they're not directly associated with the case. However, if I can support the victim and the victim was interested in telling their story and we can hear it from them and financially support them by purchasing their book, that's definitely preferable. So first up, I Know You Really Love Me by Doreen Orion. This is particularly interesting to me because Doreen is a psychiatrist. So obviously you're getting a unique insight into the psychology behind stalking reading this book. I read this a couple of years ago, but I always remembered it and I always thought it was so well done and interesting in the way she executed this book. The way she did this does tell her personal story, but again, as a psychiatrist, it's very analytical in her approach. So if you find this subject interesting in general, this is definitely the book that I would recommend the most because it has that insight and that analysis that really only somebody with this type of education and experience would really be able to share. So Doreen's story starts back in September of 1989, and she is actually stalked by a patient. She worked at a psychiatric hospital. She had a patient that was admitted due to a state of psychosis. Our stalker is going under the name Fran. When Doreen first meets Fran, she finds out that Fran suffers from schizophrenia. She couldn't find her flute, and she became absolutely frantic that she could not find it, and that is what triggered this larger state of psychosis and caused her to be admitted to this psychiatric hospital. She finds out that Fran actually does have a regular psychiatrist that she sees on an outpatient basis. However, because of the state that she was in when the police were called by concerned neighbors, she wasn't able to communicate that to them and they had no way of knowing, so they didn't bring her to that other facility. They brought her to this one. She ends up staying at this hospital for 16 days, and it's at that point that Doreen feels that she is no longer a threat to herself or others, that her delusions are somewhat controlled. This is taking place back in 1989. She did not have the access to her medical records and her background the way that people do today. Today we have electronic medical records where even if you're at a different facility, you can access important medical information so that you know what medications people are on, diagnoses, what's going on, right? Well, she did not have access to that at that time. When she was treating this patient, she did not know that she had a history of erotomania, which basically means it's a type of delusion. She meets a woman, becomes obsessed with her, and becomes truly under the impression, she truly believes that that woman is in love with her. Because Doreen does not know that, she does not think twice about her treating Fran, as opposed to Fran's regular psychiatrist, who is a man, who is not subject to her delusions because she's a lesbian, right? But unfortunately, because Doreen does try to help her, she does show her kindness during her stay, of course, Fran falls into delusion in regards to Doreen. Literally the day after she is discharged, she leaves this note with the receptionist for Doreen. And I want to read this to you, actually. I was surprised, flattered by your interest, since I know you and Dr. J are an item. Hope we can pursue, but if you don't respond, I'll understand. And it included her phone number. Doreen is engaged to another psychiatrist who works at the same facility, who is a man. Despite knowing that, that does not infringe upon Fran's delusions. And obviously Doreen being very confused. This is just sort of the starting point of what will result in 8 years of stalking. 8 years of Fran pursuing Doreen. And you gotta figure, she knows where she works. She has this automatic knowledge and access to where Doreen is going to be. And she takes advantage of that, confronting her in the parking lot, leaving notes on her car, eventually leading to phone calls, finding out where she lives. It was an earlier time of stalking where it had to be more up close and personal, which made it less accessible, but also made it even scarier because it's so up close and personal. Her delusions are so strong, even when Doreen leaves the state, she just follows her. And what a scary situation. There have been cases with celebrities of people suffering from erotomania and actually killed the victim. This can result in violence. So Doreen experiencing not just fear for herself, but fear for her fiance, because Fran would be viewing him as a threat to this make-believe relationship. What might she do to Tim to get him out of the way? It covers a lot about her story. It covers a lot about erotomania, about the types of delusions, the psychology behind it. She also talks about the legal battle, and that's something that is very consistent in all of these books. It is a common theme. You know, do you pursue a restraining order? Do you have enough evidence to prove that this person is harassing you and that you are being affected by it? Can you prove that it was them? The burden of proof that is on you, and at times either the unwillingness or the inability for law enforcement to really help you much. And I thought it was interesting that this book, written back in 1989, spoke about these problems. And then these other 2 books that I read that were written more recently, within the past 5 years, talking about the same exact thing. Even though I think there have been improvements in terms of laws regarding stalking, it's still very much an issue trying to enforce those laws. And also because of the rise of social media and how stalking has changed, the accessibility of people has changed, that the laws have to catch up even more. Doreen makes a very interesting point in this book where she talks specifically how dangerous it is when you have a restraining order that is not enforced. By having this piece of paper that is supposed to mean something, if the stalker breaks that restraining order and is not punished or reprimanded in any way, how that emboldens them and also weakens the victim. And how helpless the victim feels where they've gone through these channels and yet nothing is happening. Nobody actually gives a shit. Like, I'm untouchable. This piece of paper doesn't mean anything. You're making the victim weaker and the perpetrator stronger at the same time. So that is a woman being stalked by a woman, but still pursuing, seeking romantic connection. These other two books are not like that. The next one I read is called Obsession by Nicole Madigan. I actually listened to the audio version of this. It is narrated by the author. Just a heads up that Nicole Madigan is Australian. If you're considering the audio version, that she has a very strong Australian accent, which, could be a deterrent or it could be a perk for you. You do you. Nicole's case starts back in 2018. Nicole has a bit of a unique perspective on this as well because she happens to be a journalist who focuses a lot on abuse victims. So a little bit of overlap between abuse and stalking, right? What happened with Nicole, she was in the process of getting a divorce from her husband. She met this new man, and her new man had an ex-girlfriend who was not happy that he moved on and started to stalk Nicole primarily online. This being in 2018, she has social media at her fingertips. The way that this book is designed is that the first half of it covers her personal story, and then the second half is a little bit more of her journalism, interviewing other victims, doing more investigative research into stalking and laws in Australia, and all of that stuff. So when Nicole starts dating this new man, his ex-girlfriend starts reaching out to her through social media. It comes across in the beginning as she is just trying to break up this relationship. She says things to Nicole like, oh, how does it feel to sleep in the bed that me and him fucked in 1,000,000 times? Like, oh, he really doesn't like blondes, insulting her appearance, implying that he is actually still talking to her, implying that he's bothering her, and she's like, can you get him to leave me alone? Nicole isn't really sure what to think. Like, she recognizes this irrational behavior, but the relationship is so new and so fresh that it really does cause tension at the beginning of the relationship. Even after the first time that she reaches out to Nicole, her boyfriend doesn't seem particularly surprised. It's one of those things like, oh, the crazy ex-girlfriend is actually crazy. But she really does go on this social media campaign. I think that when someone is suffering primarily from online attacks, it's really easy to just say, well, close off your social media. You don't need to be on there. But for someone like Nicole, social media is part of her job. And it's not so simple as just don't be on there. Even something as small as making her account private, which would be a very normal thing for an average person to do, but for someone in her position, that could actually have a negative impact on her career. Wanting herself to be easily accessible to normal people. To normal viewers. This woman's obsession with Nicole kind of moves on from just trying to sabotage her new relationship to just trying to punish Nicole, just trying to make her suffer. She gets into contact with Nicole's ex-husband. She is in the process still of a divorce and feeds him lies, insinuating that Nicole and her boyfriend had been dating before the divorce, genuinely interfering with their divorce settlement and custody hearing. It's affecting her relationship with her ex-husband. He's viewing her differently because he believes these lies. So it's not just social media. Like, she is breaking into the real world. She also tries to contact Nicole's mother. She tries to reach out to people who know Nicole in real life. But she is also trying to attack her online in a public way. She consistently insults Nicole's appearance. Her nose in particular she would insult, and then she would upload a picture of Gonzo, if you know Gonzo. A perfect example of a year from now, she's posting pictures of Gonzo making insults, and you try to show that to the police saying, here, see, she's targeting me. And the police are like, well, there's no proof she's talking about you, but you know she's talking about you because you have this big history. It caused a lot of anxiety in Nicole because this is someone who is publicly spreading lies about her. She ended up kind of becoming obsessed back, where she was constantly checking this ex-girlfriend's social media page because she would constantly post about her. So on one hand, you'd like to say, oh, just ignore it. You know, you're not going to know about it if you don't constantly look at it. But from her perspective, she wants to know if things are escalating. She wants to know if she's actually being named. If you know for a fact that somebody is constantly making posts about you, constantly insulting you, trying to affect your business, trying to affect your personal life, it would be very hard to just not look at it due to the fear that it would be escalating behind the scenes without you realizing it. And this is another case where this is something that she is eventually able to pursue this legally. The fear of stalking is not just what is happening, but what's coming next. Because it gets to the point where this ex is saying that she's moved into the neighborhood, implying that she knows where she lives. He was the one that she wanted, but she wasn't really stalking him at this point. She is putting all of her anger and animosity towards Nicole, punishing her for having the audacity to take something that she feels rightfully belongs to her. Which brings us into our last book, which actually has somewhat of a similar premise to Obsession. This is called Me and My Shadow: Why Women Stalk Other Women. And it is by Kimberley Alice. So I do need to preface this, that this book is not exactly what I thought it was going to be. When I picked this book out, I thought it was going to be statistics, and I thought it was going to be more about the psychology behind this subject. However, this is not a professional writer. This is someone who was stalked, felt victimized by it, was not able to receive help from law enforcement, and ended up writing a book to process her trauma, sort of, and to get something out of this horrendous experience. So this is independently published, and so it's important to keep that in mind. I kept thinking as I was reading it in the beginning that this book really could have benefited from an editor, but once I got to the point where I understood why she wrote the book, you have to have that frame of reference going into it and appreciate it for what it is. This is more of a personal retelling by someone who is not otherwise an author. Similarly to the last case, we have a woman who ends up getting stalked by the ex-girlfriend of her boyfriend. It seems that that is a very big trigger for women who are otherwise mentally unstable. It's very possessive. You took someone that I wanted. You took the life that I wanted. You represent something that I wish I was, and it infuriates me, and you need to suffer for it. But this is actually strangely intense compared to the last one, and yet she received much less support. This takes place in the UK. Her stalking began back in 2022 after she and her then fiance announced their engagement on social media. But the thing is that his ex-girlfriend was not really out of the picture prior to this. There is a common theme here between this and the last book that are handled very differently. In this case, this isn't just a crazy ex that he dated for a few months. This was an abusive relationship that he was victimized in for years. This woman completely broke down this man's spirit, emotionally, mentally, possibly physically abusive. I'm not 100% sure on the physical. I know she threatened him with physical violence. I didn't see it confirmed that she ever actually physically harmed him, so hopefully I didn't misunderstand. This man, after that relationship, was diagnosed with not just anxiety and depression, but CPTSD. Basically, the way she explained it in the book means that he is perpetually in a state of fight or flight. At all times, anxious and at alert, filled with tension for this man to get into this state. It was a pretty rough few years for him, and he tried to leave several times before he successfully left her. Even at the point that he met his fiancée, the author of this book, he was still receiving texts and calls from her that were just filled with threats and insults. This woman had still not left him alone, but he was scared to block her because he believed that if he did that, that it would only cause her to pursue him in real life. And it's just something where I'm sorry, I know that this subject is women stalking women, but I have to say, both of these last two stories, we talk about an ex-girlfriend who was not quite right in the relationship with the man. That's why the relationship ended. And yet, and especially in this case, the abuse that this man endured for years and her persistent harassment after the relationship ended. And yet, it was not until she started to pester the woman in his life that it was taken seriously enough to pursue involving police. And I think that that is very telling that this behavior was not seen as serious enough to involve police when it was just him. I do not mean any insult towards this author because she spends a lot of time talking about the experience that her now husband endured, as opposed to the last book where Nicole respectfully barely mentions his experience with the stalker. I don't know if he truly just did not have it that bad, but his experience with the ex-girlfriend is only briefly mentioned, and it very much comes across as her experience and not so much as their experience collectively. Unlike in this book, where it definitely comes across as something they endured together. However, there are statements in this book that imply that now that it's affecting her directly, now it's a problem. This woman's behavior, I cannot believe, I am genuinely in shock that her behavior was not enough to get police involved. Not only was she doing all of the same behaviors that were involved in the last book, as far as making multiple accounts, trying to contact her constantly, using her picture, creating a fake account with her picture, and then messaging people to create fake screenshots trying to prove that she did this or she said that. That's something that also happened to Nicole, I forgot to mention. So all of this sort of stuff is happening, but on top of that, it is much more in person. This is kind of a combination of the first two books where you have that online threat, but she is also going to their home regularly. Not just once, but regularly taking the air out of their tires. Once she knew what vehicle mine was, my tires started to get let down too. What a surprise. I was beginning to get annoyed with her now. Just now, the woman who abused your husband and has been actively letting the air out of his tires, but now it's your tires. So now you're starting to get annoyed. I worked out their characters very quickly once their smear campaign was launched on me. You worked out their characters after it was launched at you. The woman who abused left him with CPTSD diagnosed. And oh, well, now that you're the victim of a smear campaign. I'm not trying to shit on this author at all because she takes so much more time talking about his story, his experience. She clearly shows a lot of love and compassion for him throughout this story. I just think that it's indicative of a more societal perception that we have, that women are just not a genuine threat against men. And so, a woman can be afraid of another woman, but a man can't be afraid of a woman, that sort of thing. But let me tell you what happens next. And this part blows my mind. This woman has proven that she is willing to tamper with their cars. There is a day where Kimberley goes outside and notices a puddle under her car, and yet does not think much of it and still gets into her car. She drives to work without incident, but then when she tries to drive home, her brakes stop working. And thankfully, she was able to roll to a stop eventually. However, her brakes stopped working. Somebody, gee, I wonder who, tampered with her brakes. Nothing came of this because they couldn't prove that it was her, which is crazy because that legitimately could have resulted in her death. I understand that if you can't prove it was her, that she can't be charged, but it's just, I just cannot believe that something that literally could have resulted in her death or the death of other people on the road had no repercussions. Nothing happened. Nothing at all. This woman is dangerous. This woman is a threat. She happened to do this to Kimberly's car, but there is absolutely no reason why she couldn't have done this to the husband's car, right? This implication that men cannot be victims, men should not be afraid. Men are the more common perpetrators of stalking. But I am without a shadow of a doubt that men severely underreport being victims of stalking because they either do not take it seriously themselves or they don't believe that other people will take it seriously if the stalker is a woman. The attitude is so disgusting because, again, she could have killed her, and that could have just as easily been him. Women are perfectly capable of being dangerous. This is someone who is diagnosed as being borderline and narcissistic. That is a specific brand of abuse that this man endured. The manipulation that this woman showcases in this story towards him in particular, the public bashing and shaming, and it's infuriating to read about. She's never met this woman. She actually sees her in person for the first time. And she made it very clear that that was a very big turning point for her. This comes across as kind of catty, if I'm being honest, but she cannot stop commenting on how this woman is fat. Seeing her in real life kind of disrupted this image that had been built up in her head. This woman is mentally ill and dangerous. And that is something that you notice a lot with stalkers in general. But if we're focusing on female stalkers, they tend to be in their 30s. They tend to be single, either divorced or just single. They don't have a whole lot going on. So usually it seems as though they are feeling unfulfilled in their lives. And there is another woman who has something that they want, either a job, a specific man that they want, a job that they want, a status that they want. They have something that they want. And that was something that even in the first book, Fran always stalked professional women. And so there's significance to that there is something about the appeal of a woman like that loving her. The thing about women stalking women, I am lacking, and you have something that I want, and I want to possess it. I want to take it from you. I want to absorb it from you. I don't like you existing, having the thing that I want. The idea of like, oh, if I dress like you, if I do my makeup like you, if I do my hair like you, if I wear the same perfume that you wear, if I just mimic you enough, if I destroy you and mimic those things myself, then I can take over your life. I can have what I want to have and be who I want to be. This overwhelming sense of inadequacy and personal failing, a lack of empowerment to actually improve your own life. And so instead you just try to destroy somebody else's by tearing them down, by publicly shaming them, by making it seem that, oh, it's not that I'm lacking, this person's fake. See, let me show their true colors. That we have 3 stories here. The first one took place in the States, the second one in Australia, the third one in the UK. All across the world, the same goddamn problems with stalking, with police unable or unwilling to pursue it unless this is accompanied by a bigger crime. It's just really not taken seriously and kind of pushed off to the side. It's not a priority. And it's kind of that idea that trying to prevent a crime as opposed to just reacting after the crime has already occurred, not wanting things to escalate to that point. Stalking has been so romanticized in our media and whatnot. It's also something people talk about jokingly, like, oh, I stalk them on social media. It's something that is trivialized a lot. And so people who are real victims, it's just still not really taken that seriously. And it's unfortunate because it's not unusual for this to end in death. Things can escalate to that point. It's unfortunate that we are not more focused on trying to prevent that escalation, or we're wasting resources because it hasn't escalated yet, as opposed to we're lucky this hasn't escalated yet. We have to nip this in the bud before it does. We have to prevent more serious crime from taking place. The attitude around it kind of being a little bit off kilter. A lot of victims are not here anymore to tell their story, and it's a very heavy subject that often gets kind of buried underneath the way that it's been kind of romanticized in media. It's not a romance story, it's a horror story. If you're still here, thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it, and maybe I'll see you the next time around. Bye. Erotomaniac. Oh.